So I did a second grade standard math that's working with time and money. The standard is solve word problems involving dollar bills, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies using the dollar and cent symbols appropriately. The essential element that goes along with that is recognize that money has value. So for lesson objectives, the target is the student will be able to solve word problems involving dollar bills, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. Will be able to use the dollar and cent symbols appropriately 80% of the time. And for the target, with an accommodations, that same thing, except they'll get a cheat sheet to use throughout the whole lesson. That'll make things a little easier. So here it shows them all the values, and then it shows them when to use a dollar symbol and when to use a cent symbol, and then how many of each go into each other, and then a list of steps so they with an example, so they always have that to look back on. And then for the below target, it is the student will be able to recognize that money has value and add those values 80% of the time, which goes along with that essential element. And then for the above target, the students will compare word problems involving dollar bills, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies while using the dollar and cent symbols appropriately and figure out which word problem's total has a larger or lesser value. For lesson assessments, for formal, for the target, the students will complete a worksheet where they will solve word problems involving dollar bills, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. For the target accommodation, they will do that same worksheet, but they will be having their cheat sheet to help them along the way. For the below target kids, they'll complete a worksheet where they'll just add money values. So the money values that would be in the word problem are already taken out, so they already have that. So all they have to do is the adding. And then for the above kids, they will complete a worksheet. Same thing, they'll solve the word problems, but then they'll compare which value is higher, is larger or smaller. And then informal for all of them, we'll be using dry erase boards. We'll be putting like a word problem on the board, and then they'll have to be showing their answer. So for previous knowledge and skills, they must know the value of a dollar, quarter, dime, nickel, and penny. And they must know how many goes into each, just understanding the money system. And the academic language that will be used throughout the entire lesson is dollar bills, quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, cent and the cent symbol, dollar and the dollar symbol, and total. And then, so for the anticipatory set, we will use, I will use a clapping pattern. The kids will repeat and then remain silent after they've repeated it. So I would start with the connection to students and explain to them that it's an important concept to learn because it's something that you will use every day. Anytime you go to the store, you'll mentally add up all your items. For example, if you pick up an item for $4.50 and another item for $2, you have to know what your total may be before you get to the register in case you may only have $10 in your pocket, so you have to know if you'll be able to afford that before you get to the register. I will make a verbal connection to the prior learning. So before they've just done word problems with just regular numbers. So this time they just have to picture everything as still a regular number, but it's just a money amount. And then for the student-friendly lesson objectives, I will say that by the end, you should all be able to say that I can solve word problems involving dollar bills, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies, and appropriately use the dollar and cent symbols. So now we'll move on to the instructional sequence. This will take about 50 minutes. So we'll start with the direct and focused instruction. First, I'll make a connection to previous skills, like I just kind of talked about before. So Previously, I would say our word problems looked something like Sally had 3 canned goods, and then to bring to the food drive, Molly brought 5 and Sam brought 7. How many canned goods did they all bring together? So first they know that they would pull out all the numbers, and then they would find their total in something that looked like that. So then I would do a model / talk aloud. So I would model 3 examples of word problems, and I would explain my thought process. So I start with an example that Mary was grocery shopping and picked up an item for $3, and then she picked up another item for $6.25. So this is how it would look, how we would set it up. And then, so I teach them that you need to line up just like you're adding. You can get rid of the decimal points, which we'll just call them decimal points even in money because that's how they know them as. So we're going to add it up. So it looks like you are just adding 300 and 625. So you do this math. And then, so you get $925 as your answer, but it's not $925, so I have to teach them that you move the decimal point 2 spots in to give it $9.25. And because the number is bigger than 99 cents, you're working with a dollar amount, you're going to use the dollar symbol as your label instead of a cent symbol. So your answer would look like that. So that'd be kind of my think aloud. And I would do that a couple times over. And if I realize that no one has immediate questions after I model it, we will move on and have them start trying some. So next, we're going to move on to guided instruction. So I'm going to lead some questions, but I'm going to get some help from them along the way to see how they're understanding after I did my modeling. So you start with the input, and I would give each student a worksheet, and I would tell them don't work ahead, even if you know the answer already, because we're going to work through them all together. And some kids will have fake money or that cheat sheet to use as an aid. So then I would move on to question, and I would walk through 3 questions with them. And I would give them a specific question about each one after. That's working through Bloom's taxonomy, just to get some higher level questions. So like a couple of the questions would be, can you predict what symbol you will use in the total, and how did you know what one you were going to use? And then you will like for the first one be like, what are the $3 amounts that you will be adding? So that's just practicing them pulling out the numbers for the word problem. And then, can you explain how you found your answer? So for responses, I will do quick calls. They will have time to work through the answer, to find the answer and answer the specific question that I gave them along with that. Once the majority is done, I'll use my attention signal to get everyone back together. And I will pick a stick out of the cup, and each stick has the name of a student on it, and they will share their answer. And then once the first person that I called on shared their answer, I will see if anyone else found a different answer. And if there are multiple answers, I'll walk through the steps with them, how I originally modeled it, and see how we got to our final answer. And the students that are below will have a worksheet with those values already pulled out, so they will see what word problem we're working on, but they pretty much just have to do the adding and recognizing that those are money values. To monitor, I will be monitoring by, at the end, collecting their worksheets. Therefore, I can see what strategies they did on their own to try to find the answers, how many times they redid the problem, or if they completely started over and crossed off all their original work once we went together as a whole group. For feedback, while giving the students time to figure out their answer on their own, I'll be walking around and taking a look at what they're doing. If someone's getting a little off track with the steps, I will tell them to look at someone near them, not to get the answer, but get a clue of how to get started back on the right track. And if I see someone that's way off or really frustrated, struggling, I'll sit down with them and give them direct explanation and talk them through another example while writing a list of steps that they can look back on. And then the evidence of learning for that will be formal, and I'll collect the worksheets. And if I see that the majority of the class seem to understand how to get the correct answer in the end, then we'll move on to small groups. So next would be the collaborative instruction. It will be productive group work. In the end, the groups will all have to come to an agreeing answer to share with the rest of the class. I'll give 3 word problems that they'll work through together. So I'll break them into groups, and the kids will pull a number out of a hat, and there are 4 of each number. Once everyone is picked, they'll find the group members and find a place in the room to sit. Then I'm going to use a think, ink, pair, share. So they'll be seeing their groups, and I'll put a word problem on the board, and quietly and individually, for the think part, they will try to solve on a piece of loose leaf paper. And again, for those below students, I'll provide those values already pulled out, so they just have to do the math. So once all 4 members of the group have completed it, they will share with the members of the group and explain their steps to find their answer. And making sure to use the academic language that we had talked about. If there are multiple different answers, then the group will have to walk through the problem all together to find an answer that they all agree on. And if you're doing it and you have a disagreement, someone's not understanding how you got something, the other group members will help them and guide them. So using some peer teaching. And then I will also be walking around to encourage questions that may help support those struggling students. Once they've all come to an agreeing answer, they'll write it with the appropriate label on their dry erase board. And then once I see all the groups have written on their board, I will have each group share their answer. Share their answer and how they figured it out. And if there are different answers, they will have to explain and defend why they believe their answer is right. So for evidence of learning for that, it will be informal, and I will know by seeing if everyone is able to successfully figure out the answer by showing their group's dry erase board. And I'll also be walking around when they're working individually in the beginning to see if they understand. I'll also make sure all group members are participating and using the appropriate academic language or helping a classmate that is confused. So then, for the last part for this is the independent instruction. So first I'll do the metacognition, which is like their own think aloud. So I'll give them work time to work on some problems of their own, since they've been doing everything together so far. I'll put 1 word problem on the board at a time, and they'll have time to do their own think aloud. They will do it completely on their own, and then we'll go over it all together at the end just to check everyone's work. I will not speak or help during the time of student sharing. If they get stuck, they'll rely on their classmates to help them through. And I'll be making sure they're using the appropriate academic language. We'll go through 5 examples, and then while they are, for the struggling students, while they are working individually, that's the time that I will use to check in on them and see how they are understanding it and give them extra assistance to make it even more easier. Or if they're good to go, just leave them be and keep doing it on their own, which is what we hope for. For evidence of learning for that, it will be informal. I'll see who can confidently do these problems on their own, and whoever is sharing, if they can easily go through the steps with the appropriate academic language, and also who is able to help out when someone gets stuck when they're sharing. And then for my closure, first I'll start with the review. So I'll explain that today we learned how to solve word problems involving dollars, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies, and how to use dollar and cent symbols appropriately. So now hopefully all the students are able to say, I can solve word problems involving dollar bills, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies, and use the dollar and cent symbols appropriately. On their way out, I'll have them fill out the exit slip where they'll circle the red dot if they are still feeling pretty lost, not quite getting how to do it. They'll circle the yellow dot if they kind of get it, but just a little confused on some parts. And they'll circle green if they are good to go and get it all. And in the open space below the dots, they can explain what parts they may be confused about, so I can individually talk with them about those or go over them the next day. For the preview for the next lesson, if I see the majority of them have circled green dots, we'll move on to working with larger numbers. Today I stuck with the smaller numbers just to make it a little bit easier, but they'll do the same steps and same language, just a larger array of numbers. And then I'll assign the individual homework, which will match the above formal assessments, which were the worksheets. It's just like 5 word problems, and I would explain that they shouldn't be too hard. They look exactly like the ones we did in class today. And however, if they get stuck, do not worry. We'll go over them in class tomorrow for extra practice. And it's just a skill they just learned today, so they shouldn't feel bad if they do get stuck.